West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
When will the Russian people know how many Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine, and how will they react to that? There was a brief moment today when one Russian news site posted the number of 9,861 Russian soldiers killed in Ukraine and 16,153 wounded, but that was quickly taken down. And what does it mean for Russian resistance to Vladimir Putin when, according to one estimate, as many as 250,000 Russians have fled from Russia since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine? In new reporting for The New Yorker, our next guest, Masha Gessen, describes some of the people fleeing Russia. Quote, "People have fled Russia because they fear political persecution, conscription, and isolation, because they dread being locked in an unfamiliar new country that eerily resembles the old Soviet Union, and because staying in a country that is waging war feels immoral, like being inside a plane that's dropping bombs on people. They have left because the Russia they have built and inhabited is disappearing, and the more people who leave, the faster it disappears." Joining our discussion now is Masha Gessen, staff writer for The New Yorker and author of the book Surviving Autocracy. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We have been concentrating on the exodus from Ukraine, which is important and life-saving and urgent, but you are reporting on another exodus from Russia. What does this mean for Russia, that it is losing the kinds of people who cannot morally tolerate what is happening there?
I mean, it's odd, right? It's inevitable, but it's odd to compare the exodus from Russia to the people who are being displaced by war from Ukraine. And I think a lot of the people that I talk to are hyper aware of that comparison and are very quick to point out, look, you know, this is not my personal disaster. Disaster is what's happening in Ukraine. And yet there are all these people. I mean, my entire world in Moscow, pretty much everyone I knew, certainly the people who made up my community, up and left in less than 2 weeks. I mean, it's not just the number of people, but just how fast people have gone. And these are largely people who made up civil society in Russia. They're the independent journalists, the educators, the activists, the NGO founders and leaders. So it is by some estimates over 250,000 people, and they're precisely the people who, in an increasingly repressive society, were creating some space for interaction, interdependence, kindness, freedom, thought.
And what I've read in your accounts of them is that they I don't hear them asking for sympathy. I hear them expressing guilt for what has happened. I hear them in your reports of them talking about hoping for a future where they can get beyond this. But one of the thing that isn't there in what I'm reading is any sense of, oh, feel sorry for me and feel sorry for us. We had to flee Russia.
Yes, I think most people I talk to certainly are very careful not to say feel sorry for me, because again, the comparison is inevitable. I think people are still sorting out, and it will be sorting out for a while, the degrees of responsibility and guilt that they feel. They mostly reject the idea of collective guilt, but there is a sense of responsibility. And it's odd that the only people who even engage with this idea of responsibility for what Russia is doing are the people who did anything at all to try to prevent this. But many of them say, look, we obviously didn't do enough because we didn't prevent it.
Does this reduce the possibility of a reckoning for Vladimir Putin because these are the people who are leaving? And will there be any kind of reckoning if and when the Russian people find out what the Russian losses are in Ukraine?
So that's a great question. I think there are a couple of parts to it. One is what happens now. Right? Are Russians going to find out what kind of losses there are in Ukraine? And I think we have to understand that if they do, it will take a long time, possibly years, because a lot of people who are already dead are going to be considered missing in action. Or, and it may even be a while before that's acknowledged because they had to surrender their cell phones before they were deployed. The Russians have legalized the use of mass graves. They're using mobile crematoria. So people, families who don't hear from their loved ones, it may be weeks or months before they really start to consider the possibility that these people are dead. And then also with a total crackdown on media, you don't see that information getting around, right? It's a vast country. People are being conscripted from all over the country. So in a situation where society is really atomized and people are not talking to anyone but their immediate surroundings, it may be quite a long time, if it ever happens, that people realize just how vast the losses are. So it's sort of one kind of reckoning. And the other kind of reckoning is, what happens after Putinism ends? It will end at some point. And what we have seen in the last few weeks that I think is incredibly disturbing is that not only are independent media being forced to shut down, but they're also, on many occasions, forced to remove their websites and remove their archives. And so what is the material, what is the evidence that we're going to be dealing with for a reckoning after Putinism? We had this problem after the Soviet Union collapsed. It's been 31 years and there still isn't an account.
It is Tuesday, the 22nd of March of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunnar the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. There's a lot of twos in these Tuesdays, aren't there? Well, on Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, you must realize that it is only a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika that will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. You might even consider that the invasion of Ukraine might be an extension of the old spice trade wars. Might be. Okay, well, we have continue to have perilous times ahead for us, and I suppose we should make preparations. Yeah. I actually think that digging holes in the ground and fortifying them might be another growth industry like back in the day. The problem with all the bomb shelters back in the day, people probably forget or don't realize, there was a lot of corruption behind those. Contractors, cement contractors, etc., would pressure city governments to pass ordinances that you had to build these things. And of course, then these industries get paid, don't they? Yes, they do. Whether you need it or not. So I just remember some of the jokes were that the whole bomb shelter scare was akin to somebody driving through your neighborhood, breaking a bunch of car windshields and then handing out cards that, hey, we heard your windshield was broken. Here's a number to get it repaired and replaced. So, yeah. But the magic of the free market sometimes incorporates making you buy things that you don't really need. How magical is that? You may want it, but you don't need it. And even if you don't want it, you still got to get it. Isn't that magical? Well, I think probably folks who are wondering what they're going to do now that they've lost their tech jobs. Have they? Have they lost their tech jobs? Anyway, you could start a bomb shelter building business. I think that you might have about 70 million, at least 70 million potential customers who just believe that they got to have it. And then all the sundry items that come with all of that. I mean, you got to have some MREs. Air conditioner guys, air filtration guys, they get to have a job. Yeah, I don't know. It might be a good idea. Because we might have to live underground anyway, because if we lose our atmosphere, oh my God, those cosmic rays are going to scorch the earth, and the only thing that survives are those that, are underneath the ground a bit. And then all those dystopian 1970s science fiction movies will come to pass. Like The Terminal Man. Remember The Terminal Man? Look it up. IMDb has it. They do. They do. Okay, well, such a day ahead of us. Oh, I got to mention something about the fact that there are seditious insurgents sitting on the Judiciary Committee as we speak. Or at least as I do. And they were on there yesterday. And they're on there today. And it looks like they're going to be on there tomorrow as well. How is it that somebody who actively participated in the overthrow of the United States of America a mere year and a few months ago, a year and a few weeks ago, a couple of months, is still in government? I still do not understand that only in America. Oh, it's their fundamental right. I caught a little bit of Grassley's questioning. A good thing that his wife told him, hey, look, Grass, lighten up. The lady is really qualified. What are you doing? Of course, he did say that she didn't say anything about his speech or his presentation, but so I still am bothered by the fact that you got a Tom Cotton and, more importantly, a Josh Hawley. I mean, sure, Lindsey Graham, I mean, that guy blows with the winds. He's going to be the toady mayor in Red Dawn. Trust me. And then he'll be marched to the rock pile like the rest of them. But he thinks that he can hold off for a while and maybe get in the good graces of whoever it is. So, he's part of the group to begin with. But I'm thinking of that Josh Hawley guy. After there was actually an agreement, apparently, by the Republicans. Because I think that they feel that if they come too hard on the nominee, then that might not play well in Peoria or Prioria. I don't know. Peoria. And they could be correct. But Josh Hawley doesn't care. And he made that very clear when he said, hey, I don't care what these other people think. So a few people had to clean up his mess. And I think offer dry cleaning services to the nominee from anything that splashed on her. Ugh. But I still am quite bothered by the fact that you have insurgents being able to question a Supreme Court nominee. as if they have any credibility in the functioning aspect of this government. They should not even be allowed to be anywhere near government. There was a line of questioning that began with Grassley about fundamental rights. Do you believe that liberal protesters and conservative protesters have the same rights to protest? Yes. And then it came upon the Second Amendment right. Everybody has a fundamental right to have a gun. What do you think about that? Well, I believe in precedent. Well, that's not good enough. We don't believe in precedent anymore. You can't fall back on those old excuses that you believe in what the court decided before are supposed to have any bearing for today. Yeah. Just don't call it politically motivated court, all right? 6-3, as if the liberals on the court are the scourge and we have to, I don't know, purge it all. Purge the scourge. So this line of questioning, I could see, I had to stop it because, of course, I have to prepare for the show, you know. The line of questioning was getting me a bit perturbed, a bit hot under the collar. Was Grassley going the line of political protest, Second Amendment right to carry a gun means, and therefore you can carry it to a protest? You can carry it to a polling place? You can carry it to a daycare, into a church? You can carry it into the ER? And apparently be able to use it because it's now your First Amendment right to protest with it. And so all those people that went to the Capitol on January 6th were just merely protesters, merely expressing their First Amendment fundamental right to redress their government. But I do remember, not too long before that, when there was a rumor that Black Lives Matter was going to hold a protest in the same area. And somehow there were National Guard lined up, looking like, the Ninja Turtles, the Mutant Ninja Turtles. All decked up, masked up with their visors. You can't tell who they are. Hundreds and hundreds of them. Hundreds. Black Lives Matter didn't show up because it was just a mere rumor. But on January 6th, there was a coordinated effort that took quite a bit of time. There were rehearsals at state houses across the country. And this is another thing people don't realize. On the same day of January 6th, when the nation's capital was stormed, there were dozens of state capitals that were stormed as well. Oh, we can't tell if there's any coordinated effort behind this. They had buses. They even printed up shirts. They called it a civil war. Black Lives Matter wants black people to, have some recognition that they're people so that cops stop killing them. And maybe, extend a bit of voting rights to people that have been kept out of the system and maybe, give them a voice because this is, after all, the United States of America. A mere rumor. Black Lives Matter was going to have a small march. And they were able to mobilize a military police force. But when the insurgency actually happens, that's just a mere protest. They weren't armed, even though they were, with guns. Yeah, they were armed with bear spray and poles and sticks and nunchucks and knives and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're trying to say, they weren't armed because they didn't have guns. They had guns too, all right? So, was Grassley trying to lead a learned jurist down the path that conservatives are not treated as fairly as liberals are? Because look at the protests. Our cities were burning. The cities were not burning, and the only things that were burning were dumpster fires, literal dumpster fires. Started by the agitators, Proud Boys themselves, the 3%ers, and in many instances, the cops themselves. No Black Lives Matter protest tried to take over a federal or county or any kind of building to turn over the United States of America or even a state. And yet these right-wing neo-Nazis repeatedly, they had help in this state of Oregon, by the way, and those Republican legislators got tried in a court of law and kicked out of government. Let alone the criminal charges involved in allowing a mob to enter the state building, the state capitol. That wasn't the first time either. Repeatedly. In my little town of Rogue River, a couple of thousand white people had to show up because they had heard that busloads of Antifa and busloads of Black Lives Matter were going to come across our bridge, across the Rogue River into our little town and take it over. And it was like the Danziger Bridge, except worse because there was a lot more of them, and they all had guns. A rumor. And yet, every Saturday they had these neo-Nazi Taliban truck parades in Grants Pass, yelling the N-word at black people walking on the streets. Oh, yeah. That's just their First Amendment fundamental right. Mention on a Facebook page that maybe Trump's mob ties might preclude him from being the leader of the free world, and you will be suspended. Cancel culture, I think is what it's called. Apparently, we're trying to cancel their bigotry, and that will not stand. Will it? Well, I just looked at the time, folks. Maybe I should get on with it, huh? Yeah, I've got a lot of opinions. I've got a lot of frustration. Get off my dichondra! What? Remember when people had dichondra? Maybe people didn't where you live. They sure did where I was. Anyway, we do have a curated show, as you know, because we take the time for it. And sometimes we just, the morning just gets us on to a foot of, well, I'm going to rant because I'm a little peeved. I am. Well, we do have a curated show. And what is that curated show here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays? At the top, that was Masa Gessen explaining how hundreds of thousands of Russians have fled their country over Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And sadly, some are being kept from being able to emigrate here. I think that we should, expedite those interviews, because maybe the ones who don't want Putin's reign to continue might be our friends. On the rest of the menu, the SEC announced a new rule that will require companies to disclose environmental records. The Supreme Court will not review the case of a Seattle-based Christian organization that was sued after declining to hire a bisexual lawyer who applied for a job. Yeah, it was a Christian organization that kicked it up to the Supremes, and they said, no. The lower court ruling stands. And Biden warned U.S. companies of potential Russian cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, and I might add that we as private citizens better take a few precautions ourselves. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the Biden administration expanded existing U.S. travel bans against Chinese officials accused of repressing ethnic and religious minorities. And Armed assailants killed Mexican lawyer and Indigenous rights activist Patricia Rivera Reyes. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by the Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon site. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, we're able to pool those dollars with what we pull out of our own wallets and pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this powerhouse of resistance against dark forces arrayed against not only the United States of America, but representative democracy around the world. I was checking the demographics, the geolocation of our listeners, and apparently, don't tell anybody, but apparently Russia is still downloading West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, so that's good. We got to get the word out. Hey, Russia, tell Vlad to stop killing people. He's doing it in your name. All right? It's not good. He is the aggressor here, no matter what they're telling you. The rest of the world is pissed off. You may not know it, but they are. So wake up. I actually think the people in Russia who might be listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy don't really need to hear that from us. They know. But trying to give a bit more news than I suppose what they're able to get. And we do that here as well. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us to, I don't know, be Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Slavia, Radio Free Russia. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is just a salon where we kick it around. Okay? And one thing that we like to kick around are a bunch of Nazis going into another country saying they're going to denazify the country while they kill 94-year-old Auschwitz survivors who are Holocaust survivors who survived 4 death camps. Think about that. Survived 4 death camps that the Nazis sent this poor guy to, and who kills him? Putin. Yeah, that Z is just an unfinished swastika. All right, Russia? Just letting you know. Yep, gonna denazify a country by killing the Jews. That's one way to do it. Okay, I'm not finished yet. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. And Tom takes care of that. I should back up a little bit. Thank you, folks, for your generosity in contributing to our cause here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It's been very encouraging, and we will continue this resistance. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. And hey, those folks from Russia, if you go to the show notes and links, go ahead, roam around Daily Codes. They got some good news for you there too. And then, of course, I try to get it posted up on Twitter and other social media platforms before the show starts, but unfortunately I don't always get that done. I apologize. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. Pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And the deep archive of West Coast Cookbook shows and all the Netroots radio shows over all these many years, 11 to be exact, can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Look for Netroots Radio. We're there. And then you can find West Coast Cookbook at Speakeasy in the Justice Department. And at the table, the 523 Happy Hour. I think. I got to ask Kelly. I don't think she's actually got those shows loaded up. We got to get those in there. Okay, let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It is Out of the American Independent by the great Oliver Willis. Yesterday, Monday, the Securities and Exchange Commission proposed new rules that would require public companies to make standardized disclosures of information on greenhouse gas emissions and the impact climate change could have on their businesses. Once finalized, the rules would apply to the nearly 6,000 publicly traded companies in the U.S. Today, investors representing literally tens of trillions of dollars support climate-related disclosures because they recognize that climate risk can pose significant financial risk to companies, and investors need reliable information about climate risks to make informed investment decisions, said SE Chair Gary Gensler in a statement. Now, Gensler was nominated to the position by President Joe Biden in January of 2021 and confirmed by the Senate in April of that year. And, of course, the Republicans are all up in arms. Literally. You can't use climate change to assign risk to a property. I'm sorry, but actuaries have been doing it for quite a while already. And so has the Defense Department. Because when your bases are underwater, they don't work very well, especially if they're a land-based base and not a submarine base. The newly proposed rules are still subject to final approval by the SEC and, if implemented, would be phased in with gradually escalating levels of disclosure for companies. If it was you and me, we'd have to present all of it right now. They get to spread it out over time. The announcement follows a roadmap announced by the Biden administration in October of 2021 for making the U.S. economy more responsive to the impact of climate change. In that document, the administration called climate change a systemic risk to American families, businesses, and the economy. And you know the GOP is going to call that CRT. Some large investors have set a uniform standard of making disclosures about emissions and other impacts would assist them in devising investment strategies. Timothy Smith, an advisor with the investment firm Boston Walden Trust, told the Washington Post, "I need a common set of data to help make an informed investment decision." Under the disclosure requirements contained in the proposed rules, investors would have more information to use in directing money to companies that are making concrete efforts to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and preparing their organizations for the effects of future climate change. Associated Press staff bring us this next offering here at the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. You know, I should add here that I'm avoiding Reuters for the moment because they have not stopped their agreement with TASS, which is Russia state media. So I'm a bit concerned about directing any store or any research their way until that issue is rectified. And I hope that Reuters rectifies it real soon. because they've got enough, or they've had enough journalists of their own killed in war zones over the many, many years, and you'd think that maybe they would be a party to an invasionary force. Okay, that said, let's get into this offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Supreme Court says it will not review the case of a Seattle-based Christian organization that was sued after declining to hire a bisexual lawyer who applied for a job. A lower court let the case go forward, and the high court said yesterday, it would not intervene. Two justices, Alito and Thomas, agreed with the decision not to hear the case at this stage, but said the day may soon come when the court needs to confront the issue the case represents. The case the high court declined to hear involves Seattle's Union Gospel Mission. In addition to providing food and shelter to the homeless, the organization offers addiction recovery, job placement, and legal services, and a lot of guilt. You sit here and listen to this sermon about fire, this sermon about fire and brimstone, and then you can eat. In 2016, it was looking for an attorney to help its staff its legal aid clinic. One of the applicants was Matthew Woods, who had volunteered at the clinic for more than 3 years. Woods identifies as bisexual and was in a same-sex relationship. He was told before he applied that his application would be rejected because the organization's code of conduct excludes homosexual activities. Woods sued, arguing that the organization violated state law by discriminating against him on the basis of his sexual orientation. A state trial court judge ruled for Seattle's Union Gospel Mission and dismissed Woods' lawsuit. The judge ruled that the organization is exempt from the state's anti-discrimination law, but the Washington State Supreme Court reversed the decision and let the lawsuit go forward. The Supreme Court does already have a different high-profile dispute involving a clash between religion and the rights of LGBTQ people on its docket. That dispute involves a Colorado web designer who says her religious beliefs prevent her from offering wedding website designs to gay couples. That case is expected to be argued in the fall. Sutterman of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. President Joe Biden yesterday, Monday, urged U.S. companies to make sure their digital doors are locked tight because of, quote, evolving intelligence, end quote, that Russia is considering launching cyber attacks against critical infrastructure targets as the war in Ukraine continues. Addressing corporate CEOs at their quarterly meeting, Biden told the business leaders they have a patriotic obligation to harden their systems against such attacks. He said federal assistance is available should they want it, but that the decision is theirs alone to make. Biden said the administration has issued new warnings that, based on evolving intelligence, Russia may be planning a cyber attack against us. The magnitude of Russia's cyber capacity is fairly consequential, and it is coming, the president said. The president said the federal government is doing its part to prepare for an attack and warned the private sector CEOs that it also is in the national interest that they do the same. I would respectfully suggest it's a patriotic obligation for you to invest as much as you can in technology to counter cyber attacks, Biden told members of the Business Roundtable. We are prepared to help you, as I said, with any tools and expertise we possess if you're ready to do that. But it is your decision as to the steps you'll take and your responsibility to take them, not ours. In other words, it's not a mandate. Biden's top security aide Ann Neuberger expressed frustration at a White House press briefing earlier yesterday that some critical infrastructure entities have ignored alerts from federal agencies to fix known problems and software that could be exploited by Russian hackers. Notwithstanding these repeated warnings, we continue to see adversaries compromising systems that use known vulnerabilities for which there are patches, Neuberger said, who is the president's deputy national security advisor for cyber and emerging technologies. That makes it far easier for attackers than it needs to be, Neuberger summed up. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we'll go over the evidence that vaccines help kids, despite Florida's absurd claims to the contrary.
Then we'll look at the war in Ukraine and its bad effects on COVID treatment and spread.
Last week, Florida's Surgeon General created an uproar. He said he wouldn't recommend vaccines for healthy children because the shots didn't help and might even cause harm. That goes against all sorts of evidence, doesn't it?
What Florida officials said isn't true, Tanya. In children, research shows COVID vaccines prevent infections and hospitalizations. I'll run through that. The policies of Florida's health department seem more in line with the politics of the state governor, Ron DeSantis, than they are with reality. DeSantis has argued that wearing masks and restricting activities when the disease is spreading do more harm than good. That's contradicted by several dozen studies. Now his Surgeon General, Joseph Ladapo, has added that for healthy children under 17, vaccination risks may outweigh benefits. And that's when the not true part comes in. Two groups of independent vaccine experts, one that advises the FDA and one that advises the CDC, have looked at this research. The FDA group voted 17-0 to authorize the vaccines for young kids because the benefits are greater. The CDC group voted 14-0. These groups aren't rubber stamps. Members of the FDA panel, in fact, recently objected to a move to authorize the vaccines for babies, saying the evidence wasn't strong enough. I spoke to several members of both groups to get their take. Paul Offit, a vaccine expert at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, pointed out that in tests for vaccine effectiveness in kids aged 12 to 15, there were 0 COVID cases in the vaccinated group, but there were 18 cases in the unvaccinated group. Similar numbers were in the kids aged 5 to 11. None of these clinical trials in kids found any serious adverse events. Kids are in more danger from COVID. Catherine Poling, a pediatrician and infectious disease specialist at Wake Forest School of Medicine, told me that among infected kids, there have been about 1,200 deaths from COVID. There were about 7,500 cases of a life-threatening illness called multisystem inflammatory syndrome. Half of those were in kids aged 5 through 13. Offit added that approximately 2,600 children, previously healthy with no other risk factors, have been hospitalized for COVID during the pandemic. Can vaccines stop this kind of serious disease? Yes. One study, just published last month in the New England Journal of Medicine, looked at roughly 1,300 teenagers. Some of them had been vaccinated and some had not. More than 95% of those hospitalized with COVID had not been fully vaccinated. Same for 99% of the teens who needed life support. Numbers were much lower in vaccinated teens. Vaccination, the study found, was 94% effective at stopping hospitalization. It was 98% effective at keeping kids out of the intensive care unit. Florida also claims that vaccines can trigger myocarditis in kids. This rare condition, when seen in vaccinated people, usually resolves in a few days. When it happens after a viral infection such as COVID, research shows symptoms go on for weeks and months. So far, 9 million young kids under age 11 have been vaccinated. The number of myocarditis cases in that group? 0, according to Offit. I reached out to Florida officials, and a spokesperson for the health department told me they felt the studies didn't provide convincing evidence of a benefit. But Matthew Daly, a pediatrician who studies vaccine safety at Kaiser Permanente's Institute for Health Research, disagrees. He's on the CDC vaccine panel, and he told me they graded the data showing the vaccines prevented infection in children as having high certainty. The Florida health spokesperson told me the burden of proof is on scientists to show the vaccines help children. It's clear, unless you are playing politics, that the proof has been given. Disease and war are unfortunate companions. In Ukraine, the bombing of cities and attacks on civilians have been horrific to watch, and Ukrainians still have to deal with the pandemic, right?
It's a devastating situation, Josh. The bombing and shelling obviously pose a direct threat to human life, but in the fog of war, other health risks may be overlooked. Understandably, most people are more worried about their immediate safety than the possibility of catching COVID, but the disease remains a significant risk. COVID hasn't gone away, but priorities certainly changed, says Paul Spiegel, director of the Center for Humanitarian Health at Johns Hopkins. Crowded bomb shelters and packed subway trains are perfect conditions for COVID transmission, he says. Judging by photos, most people are understandably not wearing masks, and only about 35% of Ukrainians are fully vaccinated. Before the war, the country had been coming out of an Omicron wave and cases were declining, but it's hard to know what's happening now because of disruptions in reporting.
Have you been able to find out anything about how COVID patients are being treated?
Those who do get COVID or other illnesses will likely have a hard time getting treatment. Hospital ICU beds are being taken up by trauma patients, and there's already a dire shortage of oxygen. On top of this, we have seen a disturbing number of attacks on hospitals and healthcare workers. Willfully attacking healthcare providers and civilians could be considered a war crime. As of Wednesday, there had been at least 34 direct attacks on healthcare facilities since the war started, according to a World Health Organization surveillance system. A devastating photo circulated recently showing a pregnant woman on a stretcher amidst the bombed-out shell of a hospital in the eastern Ukrainian city of Mariupol. That woman and her baby later died, according to news reports. The WHO has called for an immediate end to these attacks and a ceasefire to allow for humanitarian assistance. Aid organizations can't even get medical supplies to many parts of the country because humanitarian corridors have been closed off.
I remember that photo. Do we know how many refugees have actually fled?
At least 3 million, and many of them could be suffering from COVID and other infections. But that does not mean that we should blame refugees for bringing in disease. The reality is that Europe already had high rates of COVID, and those rates are increasing now in the UK and other places. Nevertheless, many Ukrainian refugees will likely require medical treatment wherever they end up. Beyond COVID, the war in Ukraine is likely to increase the risk of other infectious diseases, such as TB or HIV. Ukraine already had a high burden of TB before the war, but organizations such as the Stop TB Partnership had been making progress against it. Now, that progress will likely be reversed and may take years to rebuild, according to Stop TB's executive director, Lucica Ditieu. The war may also lead to new outbreaks of vaccine-preventable illnesses such as measles and polio. An outbreak of polio cases in Ukraine late last year spurred renewed vaccination efforts, but the war has brought those to a halt. Then there's the risk of diarrheal diseases due to destruction of water and sanitation facilities. Finally, on top of everything else, Ukrainians will likely suffer lasting psychological trauma from being exposed to wartime violence and displacement. Historically, it's well established that war and violent conflicts can worsen disease outbreaks. For example, the recent Ebola outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of the Congo were exacerbated by violent conflict and attacks on healthcare workers. And the decade-long war in Syria has led to measles outbreaks. Whatever happens next in Ukraine, the conflict will likely have impacts on health and well-being that far outlast the immediate damage.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by Jeff Del Vicio and Tulika Bose.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly, and check out SciAm.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Russia's disinformation campaign is winning inside Russia.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
After invading Ukraine, Vladimir Putin shut down the one radio station and the one television station that had provided a platform for those who did not hew the government line. He severed access to Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and most recently, Instagram. And ominously and effectively, Putin made it a crime to in any way contradict the government's version of the government or his war, an offense punishable by 15 years in prison. Indeed, it is a violation of this new state security law to refer to Putin's war as a war or as an invasion instead of a special military operation. Meanwhile, Russia's state media is manufacturing lies, including that Ukraine is manufacturing chemical and biological weapons to use against Russia. The disparity, the dissonance between reality, between what the rest of the world understands Russia is doing in the Ukraine and what Russian people understand is happening, should make us appreciate yet again the singular importance of freedom of the press, the need for accuracy, and the dangers of propaganda. We thank all the brave reporters who are providing us all with facts.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union, because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. At some time during your life, you've probably read a book or heard a story by Mark Twain. But did you know that this renowned American author was also a strong supporter of labor? In 1835, he was born Samuel Clemens in the town of Hannibal, Missouri. His father died of pneumonia when Samuel was only 11. The next year, he became a printer's apprentice, working for 4 years for little pay, often under horrible conditions. As a young man, he tried his hand as a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi River and as a miner in Nevada and California. He took inspiration from the people and stories he encountered on his travels, writing under the pen name Mark Twain. Twain was a lifelong member of the International Typographical Union, and on this day in labor history, the year was 1886. Mark Twain delivered a powerful speech to the Monday Evening Club in Hartford, Connecticut. In it, he imagined the power of a united labor movement. He said, when all the bricklayers and all the machinists and all the miners and blacksmiths and printers and hod carriers and stevedores and house painters and brakemen and engineers and factory hands and all the shop girls and all of the sewing machine women and all of the telegraph operators, in a word, all the myriads of toilers in whom is slumbering the reality of that thing which you call power. When these rise, call the vast spectacle by any deluding name that will please your ear, but the fact remains that a nation has risen. In his speech, Twain painted a vivid picture of workers and of the nation rising together as one. As attacks against unions and working people mount today, now more than ever, we need such a vision of solidarity.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I wanted to get that Scientific American clip there about Florida's COVID response and DeSantis's lack of expertise in the area. So we're going to forego weather from around the world and get right into this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Matthew Lee. The Biden administration yesterday, Monday, expanded existing U.S. travel bans against Chinese officials whom it accuses of repressing ethnic and religious minorities. The State Department said it is barring those targeted from travel in the United States or to the United States due to their involvement in crackdowns on freedom of speech and religion in China and abroad. The department did not identify which officials would be subject to the expanded ban, nor say how many would be affected. The move adds to visa restrictions originally imposed by the Trump administration over China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims in the western region of Xinjiang, as well as for repression of pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong and advocates for freedoms in Tibet.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Armed assailants killed Mexican lawyer and indigenous rights activist Patricia Rivera Reyes, authorities announced yesterday, Monday. The prosecutor's office in the northern border state of Baja California said 3 masked intruders burst into a home in the border city of Tijuana, where a festivity was being held on Saturday night. The intruders robbed party-goers of their personal possessions. Rivera Reyes reportedly demanded her cell phone back when one of the assailants shot her in the head. Another man at the house was also shot in the head and taken to a local hospital. Earlier this year, the government acknowledged that 97 community and rights activists had been killed during the current administration, which took office on the 1st of December in 2018. Officials said 90% of those crimes have yet to result in convictions. So far this year, 8 journalists have been murdered in Mexico. The indigenous groups in northern Mexico are smaller and less well known than those in the south. Some of the groups live on both sides of the border. They have suffered centuries of oppression and seizure of their traditional lands. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.